Hi, I'm Dustin.
I'm Onna, and we are not qualified to investigate the paranormal. And we may be less qualified than...
An audiologist.
There you go. Yeah.
Someone who knows about audio.
We'll talk about them today.
Woot! Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. If you're listening for the first time, welcome in. We have a special podcast, or a special version going on tonight. We're going to switch things up a little bit, and I'm going to let Onna take it from here.
Yeah, I've got this one. I've got stuff to tell you about and share with you and ask you about.
That's good, because I've been drinking in preparation for this. Not water.
No.
Some water.
Or they call those after dark episodes. But what if only one of us has been drinking?
This is Paranormal Outsiders After Dark.
Before we get started, that being the one preparing this time, I have to give you credit for...
Yeah?
Yeah, it's a lot of work. Even if you don't go in... I think it's a lot of work deciding what rabbit holes not to go down.
Yes.
That's what I noticed.
Yeah, especially when you do a broad subject. So, full disclosure, Onna did tell me what the subject was this week, but only because it was such a broad subject, it's hard to just tell me to look up specific things. And so I've been researching it, and this is like a million, like every single time you see someone do a ghost hunt or do a paranormal thing, this is like one of the tools of the trade. This is one of the things that they're going to use in order to like confirm that there's a ghost or not, or confirm that there's a haunting. But anyway. Sorry. Now,
yeah.
I already took over, and I should shut up because it's your turn.
Stop explaining things.
Yep, I'm done explaining things.
So we'll be talking about electronic voice phenomena.
EVP.
Bum, 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 bum. This is our first time talking about a method or technique in the world of paranormal investigation.
Right. We've kind of touched on it before in other episodes, just because people have collected them. I think we listened to one, actually, one of them. But yeah, so this is good.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
So, you ready?
Tell me a story.
On a misty January morning in 2007, in a quiet town nestled between the rolling hills and forests of upstate New York, a group of paranormal investigators embarked on a journey to explore the unknown. The owners of a historic 19th century hotel requested their services to uncover the truth about the restless spirits of the hotel's past guests. The three women, named Liz, Sarah, and Jane, were captivated by the idea of capturing proof of these ethereal beings and decided to investigate the building. The women ventured up to the building, and with each step, the stories they had heard seemed to come to life, making their hearts race with anticipation. "It's hard to believe this place was once full of life," Sarah whispered as they reached the steps of the sleepy hotel. "Yeah, and now it's just a creepy reminder of the past," Jane replied, her voice shaking. With their equipment in hand and the morning light casting eerie shadows on the walls, the friends began their investigation. The air was thick with the scent of embers and perfumes, as if the empty hotel had been a host to a classy party, and they couldn't help but feel the weight of the hotel's tragic past.
There's that olfactory thing. People are always like, I smell it. I smell the ghost.
Sniff, sniff. But that's not what they're going to do now. They're not smelling things here. They're going to be listening. Liz, the most experienced paranormal investigator among the women, had brought her digital voice recorder, hoping to capture electronic voice phenomena, also known as EVPs, from the spirits that lingered in the building. "Okay, let's start in the main hall," Liz instructed. "We'll ask some questions and record any sounds we hear." As they stood in the center of the hall, the investigators could feel the temperature drop dramatically. Sarah shivered, clutching her arms tightly around herself. "Is there anyone here with us?" Liz asked, her voice echoing through the empty space. There was no response. The women moved from room to room, asking similar questions and pausing to allow any potential spirits to respond. Hours passed, and the friends grew increasingly disappointed by the lack of activity. Maybe the stories were just that, stories. Jane sighed and rubbed her tired eyes. "Let's call it a day," Sarah agreed. And then Liz heard what sounded like soft conversations and footsteps on the floor above, although no one else was in the building.
Ooh.
"Did you hear that?" asked Liz. "Let's give it one last try, but this time let's set up on the staircase between the floors," she said with determination. "Is there anyone here who wants to communicate with us? Please tell us your story," Liz implored. Again, silence for several minutes. The women exchanged disappointed glances and eventually decided to call it a day. The next night, they gathered at Liz's house to review the recordings from the hotel. They listened intently as the sound of their voices echoed through the speakers, followed by silence. Just as they were about to give up, they heard it. A bone-chilling scream, followed by a voice that seemed to come from a place of unimaginable pain. "Help me, please." The women looked at each other in shock, their faces drained of color. Sarah's hands shook as she clutched the armrest of her chair. "Do you think? Is it real?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It has to be," Liz replied, her eyes wide with both fear and excitement. "We captured a Class A EVP." The investigators knew they had stumbled upon something extraordinary. They couldn't ignore the voice that cried out to them from the shadows of the hotel, and they vowed to return and help the spirit find peace. As they prepared for the next expedition, the investigators realized they had become part of a story that would be shared for years to come. A story that would forever link them to the haunted hotel and the echoes of the past.
A Class A EVP. So there are classes.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
that's your first response, huh?
Yeah, this is pretty typical when it comes to any kind of ghost hunting, paranormal investigation. They always bring a digital voice recorder, which is really interesting because I'm sure you're going to tell me the history of this, and we'll go into the electronics on all this because I have very strong opinions about EVPs and kind of how all that works. But yeah, it's a very common story. Like I've said before, watching Ghost Adventures, watching Ghost Hunters International, Ghost Hunters, like all of those shows, I love watching them. Again, I think most of it is, I don't want to say made up, but exaggerated, or, you know, I've seen some pretty interesting things, but not really from like the primetime television shows. Actually, it's like mostly from the YouTube channels and all that. Either way, sorry. So back on track. It's a very common story. Everything you just said, I've seen, it's like a very common theme. Yeah. You know, it's like the way to communicate with the dead.
Okay. So that piece of it, the communicating with the dead, that's one part of it.
Oh, yeah, okay.
That's just one conceptualization of EVP.
Okay.
And then you pulled out the Class A and piece of it. And
yeah, I've never heard anybody call it like... It sounds very Ghostbusters to me.
That's what first came to my mind too.
What does he say? He's like, oh, it's a Class A Spectre or something like that. You know, it's something like that.
And it's in the reboot of it with Kristen Wiig. They really go into like that. It's a full form, full body. All that. Yeah, I love that too. So I can talk with you more about the classes, but aren't you curious about the recording from this story?
Yeah.
Do you want to hear it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this one comes with its own recording.
Okay.
I'm going to have the recording from this story.
I want to hear it.
Okay. So we're going to play that now. This is long. It is 9 minutes. So it is the entirety of the recording that was shared from the story. We'll just go ahead and listen, and I just want to hear your reactions, and what you hear, you'll have control, so you can pause it wherever you want, or not at all. And we will also include it in the show notes so people can listen on their own in their leisure. We have good quality headphones on, but I don't know that we are properly investigating this, and I'll talk with you a little bit more about that too when we talk about EVP.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Play me an EVP.
Okay.
Hi everybody, Dustin from the future here, just letting some of our listeners know that I'm about to describe what I hear in this recording. If you don't want to be primed for that, go ahead and listen in to link number 1 right now in the show notes. But I do want to let everybody know that some of the sounds might be disturbing to some of our listeners, so make sure that you're aware of that. Okay, have fun. Okay, someone's rubbing up against a mic. Real quick, I paused it. How loud should I... like, is it going to be like... Wow!
Oh,
like, what's going to happen here?
There's a point at which the microphone is moved and then the sound is clear, but I don't remember it getting significantly louder.
Okay.
If it already sounds loud, though, there are louder noises that come in, so you might want to turn it down a little bit.
Okay. I can't hear very well, so we're going to...
Okay.
Is that like a clock in the background?
Allegedly.
Someone's cracked a whip.
And it should be noted there was no clock in the hotel, and no ticking clock like that.
Sounds like a shootout. Yeah, sounds like someone's like walking from room to room and shooting. And there are screams of women, mostly, being shot. That's kind of what I hear.
Okay.
Maybe like one loud male voice. Okay, women screaming, or a really rusty door being open. But it sounded very digitized at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Like when Neo gets called into the Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
More slamming of things. Okay, a clock ringing, like a clock striking. Indistinct chatter. Woman screaming and a shot. That was at 5 minutes. But the woman screaming still sounded like a rusty door being opened. It wasn't quite human.
Yeah.
It was like,
Yeah.
I heard the word landmarks at 5:50. Something about needing help at 6:15. Is this the paranormal team talking? Okay.
Yes. Yes. I wanted to see if you could differentiate that. It's going to be really difficult.
Yeah, I think they're all females, right?
Yeah.
How close are they to the recording device? Are they sitting right next to it?
I don't have that detail.
Okay.
That they apparently were recording on the staircase, so I imagine they had their equipment pretty close to them.
Because they sound terrible, which makes me think that the recorder is malfunctioning.
Okay. Good thought.
And I hear whispering. I don't know if it's them. I don't, this is obviously a very early use of the technology for them to be doing it. Because usually it's like, okay, this is me talking right now. Like they'll, modern age ghost hunters who use this technique will say, "Oh, that was me," or I'm gonna talk for a second. Like they'll let you know, like they'll timestamp themselves. Yeah, but the TikTok is still there. It's been consistent, and they said there was no clock.
Yeah, they said there was no clock of any kind of cuckoo clock or a ticking old-fashioned clock.
Because I heard a dong, like a dong of a clock at one point.
Yeah, like a chiming of like a grandfather clock, or
I heard the chiming of a grandfather clock or something. Yes, I heard the dong
donging,
but it was like a bong.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. It wasn't like a ding. It was like a bong.
Yeah, that's more interesting to me than the ticking that we could talk about.
It sounds it's like heavily modulated, so it sounds like a man sometimes, but it's not.
I want to hear you say more about that.
Okay.
That's it.
So first of all, props to the investigators for giving us the full audio. That's not something you see a lot of. Now, that might be because of the MTV generation or the YouTube generation that we all are. To me, it was definitely, the screams of the women at the beginning and the gunshots were chilling to listen to. That's something that we have to be cognizant of when we listen to these things, because we're all going to have reactions. If you hear, there are certain sounds in this world that are going to make anybody who has any amount of empathy or sympathy for their fellow man, women, children,
yes,
you're gonna have a reaction to it. So I definitely had a reaction to that. The gunshots were pretty clear to me because I've heard a lot of gunshots in my life, and that was an interesting thing. Now
that is interesting because I didn't hear that way. Like there was so much just noise,
right? And it's hard because
content warning. You're right earlier on because
and you might and a gunshot can also sound like a 2x4 falling down and hitting like a concrete floor. But it might be because we had the volume turned up really loud too. That might be part of it. But I had to turn it up to be able to hear. The women. I heard the women investigators talking. Like once they kind of started talking, I started hearing them. There was nothing really crazy that I was hearing. The tick-tock of the clock was there the entire time, and it was pretty consistent. It'd be interesting to take a stopwatch and see if it was actually consistent with the second.
Yeah.
Not that a grandfather clock, like an old-timey grandfather clock would be, but it would be pretty close.
Yeah, I wondered that too, because I noticed on this listen that at various points it maybe sounded like it sped up, or like the pacing of it wasn't consistent, like a clock should be. But
yeah,
my impressions to listening to you listen, you heard so many pieces of what I read was supposed to be heard before I listened. So I was completely primed.
Yeah.
By the articles that I read. And can I tell you a little bit more about it?
Please do.
And then go through. So this came from an article from 2018 describing this as, quote, one of the most convincing EVP recordings ever captured.
Wow.
And it came from a 2007 investigation shared by paranormal investigator Stacy Jones, who founded the Central New York Ghost Hunters. So I don't know, a couple of things I don't know is if Stacy was actually at this investigation. It took me a while to find an article where she is mentioned in more detail describing this. So when I searched back and trying to find more details to corroborate that this is actually where this recording came from and that this is true. Many articles just are copies and copies and copies of older articles. So 2018 was a recent version and there were multiple copies earlier. People just, pasting this, copy, paste, copy, paste.
Sure.
But then I did find that she had been interviewed by a radio show. So I think I'll do a little more, digging, but I think we can substantiate that this is the source of this,
okay.
Allegedly. I don't know. We'll talk about what it could be and if it's actually from that. But that's, in good faith, that's where this came from. And what you're supposedly hearing, I tried to write the story in a way that didn't include as very much detail. So you have the hotel in mind and you heard that there was going to be a voice screaming, right? You were going to hear a scream. And I told you that you were going to hear someone say, "Help me, please," right?
Yes.
And that's those 3 pieces of information.
I didn't hear anybody say, "Help me, please."
So
I heard the investigators saying no one would help or something like that. Like once they came in, I started hearing clear words. I didn't hear any clear words before that.
Okay. So you picked up on that the women investigators' voices can be heard throughout. I didn't say that was the case.
I don't think throughout. I think it was a good 7 minutes in before I was clearly able to hear their voices.
Okay. And it should be noted, they were not hearing this EVP live. They just like in the story, they heard it later, which is called a transform EVP. I'll tell you about the 2 types.
Yeah,
that's the type where you hear it recorded upon replaying it, but don't hear it live. Typically, I can tell you more about that later too. The other is live voice EVP, which is audible via electronic equipment at the time that it occurs. That was the first piece, is that you're hearing them and they're not hearing this.
Okay.
You also allegedly are hearing 3 other women talking. Supposedly there are 3 other women's voices.
Oh, 3 other women other than the investigators.
Yeah. Okay. 3 women talking. And then a person says, "Hello, baby."
I did hear a male voice at one time. It was very hard to hear what it was saying. And again, to me, if you can't really understand what they're saying, it's kind of like, well, it's not really a voice then. It's probably somebody farted or burped. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a question to me with this, is if it's electronic voice phenomenon and the way it's defined is voice or voice-like.
Right. Well, like
so what does voice-like mean if it doesn't have speech? That's interesting.
Right. Like UFOs or UA, what are they called now? UAVs?
Unexplained
aerial vehicles.
Oh, aerial, yeah.
Or something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
That, I mean, like they're unexplained. That's like, it's just like EVP. It's like a phenomena, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't like a very normal explanation for it. But anyway.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I hadn't been thinking about it. I always thought EVP was you're hearing a paranormal phenomenon in a voice recording.
No, yeah.
But it is very much like EVP is to UFO.
Right. We just don't know where it's coming from. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah.
So
anyway, sorry, go ahead.
3 other women talking, a person say, "Hello, baby," and the conversation continues. And then there's a struggle or attack. A woman tells another person to get off of her. The struggle continues. You heard that. You heard what you identified as an attack.
What I heard, and again, this might just be because of where we're at in society right now, to me it sounded like somebody going from room to room with a gun and shooting people. And sometimes the people were awake, and and this in my mind, building the narrative around what was going on. And sometimes the people were asleep, and you didn't hear, you just heard like the door being kicked and then gunshots. And then I heard the door being kicked open and then somebody screaming, usually a woman. So to me, it was like the age old, this used to be a brothel,
Yeah, so the hotel piece, what did you imagine?
Right.
No,
I was primed.
You were.
You primed me.
You were, and you can't know now if you hadn't heard it without the story.
Right.
If your mind would have created another explanation for it,
Right. To me, it sounded like multiple attacks on multiple people. And that's just kind of the way I heard it. But
it's interesting to me that even with having read this, when I listen, I'm hearing a lot of loud noises.
Right.
And the alleged screams that came in, I heard, like you said, that there was a very digitized sound at the end.
Yes.
So it almost it was just not, was that a scream in the first place, or was it a rusty door being opened?
Well, with the digitization of it, again, that raises so many red flags in my book. Okay, like that's not a very natural sound by any stretch of the imagination. It usually is like, if that's something like that is happening, it's because somebody put it in there. Usually because, honestly, somebody put it in there. It's very rare that a recording device would make that digitized sound.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, like, to me, that was like automatic. Like, that's where the chills kind of stopped, because I was like, okay, that sounded like Neo being pulled out of the Matrix. Like, that's so manufactured.
Yeah, so that maybe there were all these noises of rustling and noise, and then they added in screams.
Yeah.
Okay. Because the other parts didn't sound as digitized to you.
No, not at all. But again, like the screaming sounded more to sound, and don't get me wrong, like I've heard things where I'm like, someone's screaming, and then like it would be like, oh no, that's just a cat. Or like there would be things like that, or oh wow, that was a really loud door squeak, and to me, by the end of the sound being played, my mind concluded that it was solidified that it was a door creaking.
I think I've used the word infer here a lot, but I always confuse infer and deduce. So it's one of those two. Your mind is doing.
I think one's from the early 1900s and the other is from the late 1900s.
Oh, did Sherlock Holmes say they mean different things? I don't know. The fictional character. Concluded. Your mind concluded, assumed.
Yep.
Filled it in. Okay, so following this attack, then a distinct male voice asking for help throughout.
No. It's hard to do after one listen, but I'd have to go back and listen. But I don't remember a male voice saying help. But maybe like that, I did hear that. And that's why I'm like, oh, it sounded like someone was going from room to room and shooting people. Because it wasn't all women. But it sounded like mostly women that were being shot. That sounds really strange to say.
And I gave very, very few details about the hotel or its history. I don't have any. And okay, I'll go into that in a moment. But the sounds of a cuckoo clock, the ticking of an old-fashioned clock. There was no clock in the hotel at the time of the investigation. That's a little strange to me. No clock anywhere in an entire building. Yeah,
but you said it was an old building?
Yeah, 19th century. That's all we know because, and this is what was maintained through every copy of the article that I found, and Stacey Jones saying that the Central New York ghost hunters had been asked to anonymously investigate the hotel, not them anonymously, to keep the hotel anonymous. Huh. So we don't have any information about the hotel.
Well, that's a really interesting point because usually people would try to take this as something to get people to come in. Like we talked about the Stanley Hotel.
Yeah.
They embrace it, right? And that gets people to go there and stay. And they even have special rooms that you can stay that are extra haunted if you want to have the haunted experience, right?
Yeah, I agree. It can go either way, where you're like, okay, if they want the notoriety like the Stanley Hotel where we discussed on a previous episode, or do they want an anonymity and then you have no way of substantiating this or replicating or repeating?
Right, but then I guess the point is that now they have the most, accepted EVP or, whatever. But anyway, you know what else makes a really consistent ticking noise like that?
What?
Leaky pipes, a leaky faucet. Any one of those things is going to make a very consistent sound, which is why I thought it'd be very interesting to listen and see if someone timed it to see if it was actually a second. But anyway,
and I wondered if there could be electronics, and we'll come into the interference of electronics when we talk about this, imagine more. But if it's 2007, or if they're very new at doing this, could they be using just like a tape recorder that can make clicking sounds, or any kind of equipment that might make clicking sounds?
Yeah, I mean, EVPs have been around for a very long time. Actually, Thomas Edison, there's a famous quote of him talking about when he first does the first recording thing with the cylinder, and it was like vinyl or something like that. And he was like, yeah, we can eventually talk to the dead, So the idea of recording the voices of the dead has been around since the beginning of recording human voices. Like the idea that we can record the dead. And to them, like to me, that's almost, it's very poetic for them to think that, because they're like, when I die, you can still listen to my voice because it will be on this cylinder, or it will be on this medium that you can come and listen to. So like, I almost think they were kind of like, Thomas Edison might have been confusing that. He's like, yeah, you listen to the voices of the dead, and it's like, you can hear Thomas Edison's voice because he recorded his voice. He's dead, but you can still hear his voice.
I mean, we take for granted how much of a technology that this was when we were first able to not only communicate through telephone, but I
mean, we've had a recent phenomena that's happened that's the same, which is taking pictures, right? Where like pictures, back in the 1950s, everybody's like, I want to be on TV, I want to be on this. Now you can be on YouTube just by putting yourself on your phone. And now you can be on YouTube,
Yeah.
So like we take that for granted now too. It's like you can reach millions of viewers very quickly, and very, I guess not easily, but quickly. Depending on what you do. If you do something stupid or funny, then you're probably up there on the viral list. But
so as we're talking at broader level here, other reactions to this case before we go into EVP on a broader scale?
Yeah, really cool. I really like the recording. We'd like to hear what you guys are hearing. So go on there, take a listen, and then comment on on the pod wherever you're listening, and we'll take a look and see what a lot of people are hearing.
And I just wondered with this, because I was surprised at how finding it as the most convincing recording ever and then finding not a lot of other references to it, not a ton, but just it kind of being copied and pasted as an article, but then no one's saying this is a hoax. Like I haven't found that. So if anyone does find this thing has already been, quote, debunked, let us know. I'm just curious because, again, I don't investigate these for too long.
Okay.
So EVP in general, let me do a little bit of a brief definition and a couple of types. And this comes from a paranormal psychology book that I will cite and probably come back to a few times over our episodes.
Journey into the unknown.
Our journey into the unknown. Okay, so EVP refers to anomalous voices or voice-like sounds that are heard using electronic equipment. Paranormal explanations of EVP include the belief that they are the voices of the dead. That is the one. While others suggest that these sounds may be due to the psychokinetic effect in which human consciousness influences the operation of electronic devices.
Ooh.
So this might be...
Back to the quantum stuff.
It could be.
Yeah.
But the more... And that's what I didn't see a lot of people writing about or talking about, but... that this may be the more broader audience of people who are just looking for evidence of a paranormal phenomenon. Mm-hmm. And so that can include quantum, it can include parallel universes, or even as simple as being able to record the thoughts of a person sleeping in the room.
Okay.
Or the investigators themselves impacting their thoughts impacting what's being recorded. I
like that.
Yeah, it's kind of a neat, I didn't think about that. So, or someone in another location. So someone needs help and their consciousness is screaming across that kind of piece too.
Okay. Yeah.
So there are two types of EVP, as I mentioned before. Transform EVP, also called Type 1, involve recorded media and typically are heard only upon replaying the recording. Sometimes they're recorded while using background noise, such as white noise, a fan, or EVP software.
Okay.
Yeah, so that I was like, well, why? And that kind of comes into the next one, which is live voice EVP, also called direct radio voice, or Type 2 EVP. And these are audible via electronic equipment at the time they occur, so you don't have to replay it or to find it. They're typically captured by playing, get this, snippets of human speech or speech-like sounds very rapidly, and EVP, quote, blurt out from this stream of, quote, background noise. Techniques include radio sweep techniques, rapidly scanning...
Oh, yes. The spirit box.
Okay. You know about this. Okay. Tell us about this.
Okay. Oh, God. I almost feel like this is another episode for the spirit box. But the spirit box was developed... from what I've heard, and I'm sure there's probably multiple people who take credit for creating it, but it was created by a man who was trying to communicate with his daughter who had passed away. Oh. And he was an electronic engineer, and so what he did was he started creating a radio sweeper where like it would kind of detect a stronger radio frequency or radio signal and then play the audio that was playing through that at the time, but it would do it very rapidly and kind of like play it. So the idea is that a spirit or entity can manipulate this box to use the words that are currently being spoken over the radio to form sentences and form messages.
Oh, okay. So
that's the way
that's an interesting thing that they're kind of manipulating. I can't speak directly, but I can pull out sounds that sound like what I want to say if I'm a spirit. Okay. Yeah. So it was an older method.
It's pretty popular nowadays. Yeah. People have the spirit box for sure.
Yeah. So at first it was just rapidly scanning conventional radio stations, and now there's software that can do it and doesn't need radio. They can just chop up repeatedly used sounds and randomly order them to produce a, quote, stream of gibberish from which EVP may be heard. And what you're describing makes it's interesting.
So there's another form of the spirit box in which there's a dictionary on an electronic device that has text-to-speech that the spirit can choose from the dictionary. There's also an app, so you can actually download an app to be a spirit box, basically, and then the spirit you can ask it questions.
Yeah, we'd have to do a whole other episode on that particular piece. Yeah.
We should do one on like phone apps.
Like a new Ouija board kind of thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so whatever technique people use, what do you think about what's happening here?
I have a couple of theories. Number one, it's recording the voices of the dead. No. I think the most obvious answer answer here is that there are background noises, and I'm sure there's a term for this, but to me, pareidolia comes into mind, where we try to see, when we see a pattern, we try to see faces in it. It's called pareidolia, right, in psychology. I think there's something that happens auditorially like with that too, because anecdotally, I'll hear someone say something and I'll be like, did you say ball? And they're like, no, that's not what I said at all. Here's actually what I said. And I'm like, okay. Like I must have been thinking about something, and then that's what I heard. A lot of the EVPs that I hear, people are like, can't you hear the woman screaming help? No, it sounds like a chair scraping against the ground,
Yeah.
So I think people are hearing what they want to hear. The second and more intricate thing is this is going to take a little explanation of my point. Can I take a little sidebar here and do that?
Of course, that's what I'm asking you to do. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's talk about music. In music, if you have two stringed instruments that are tuned, the exact same instruments tuned to the exact same tuning across a room from each other. Let's say you have two guitars. If I pluck the E string, so the very first string on a guitar of one of those, the other E string on the other side of the room will start to move. It will start to move, right? That's the basis of radio technology. So the really interesting thing about frequencies and about sound, first of all, is that there are harmonics that go along with that, right? So if you hit the E string, it's not just going to make the E string start oscillating on the other guitar across the room. It will also make anything tuned to the harmonic of that string start to oscillate as well at a much lower amplitude, so a much lower power, if you will. It'll start to oscillate.
That's such a helpful explanation, at least just a baseline reminder that sound is a wave.
Yeah. No, yeah.
We forget these things.
I know. And like it's so funny because everybody's out there listening right now, and it's like this manipulation that's happening by these electronic devices that are also causing these other manipulations to happen at kind of the same, it's this very beautiful ballet and delicate dance that's like happening all around us all the time. And we just don't think, we take it all for granted. It's so funny. But anyway, speaking of a delicate ballet and a beautiful dance that happens, the harmonies, the harmonics of a note, of a musical note or of a musical sound or of a tone that we would hear, the first three harmonics are also the three notes in music theory that make a major chord. Really, really cool stuff. Okay, so keeping that music theory in mind, let's move those frequencies, right? So 440 hertz is an A, which is like the kind of standard tuning that came along in like the 1930s, but there's a whole history behind that. Anyway, let's push that frequency up by thousands, and let's go up into the megahertz. So now we're talking about radio wave frequencies, which still follow. They still fit within those physical constraints. And if you play something through a radio wave, it has harmonics. So if you have something playing at a 98.5 megahertz, on the FM radio, guess what? It's going to be playing at several other frequencies throughout. Now, pull everything back and let's talk about recording voices, recording anything on digital format, on analog format, it doesn't matter. The electronics that are involved with all this are incredibly sensitive. And let's back it up even further. In electronics theory, there is a thing called induction. Inductance is when you send an electron through a wire and it creates a magnetic field. The inverse of that is if you create a magnetic field and send it through a wire, it will create a current, right? And that's how alternators work on cars. That's how all of our energy is coming into our houses right now via these big generators, right? That's how all these things work. Everything in our current world does this. AC power comes in to most houses at 50 to 60 hertz, depending on if you're in Europe or the United States or anywhere else in the world. So already we have we are saturated with radio frequencies. Let's add in cell phones and Wi-Fi. That's everywhere. It's everywhere. Let's add in AM and FM radio stations. I know AM's kind of a dying medium, but it's still around. We have human voices consistently talking over these things. We have human voices. The spirit box doesn't even try to hide it, right? It's like, hey, we're going to embrace this and say, yeah, we know these are other people's voices, but the spirits can use them, right? Going on to digital voice recorders, going on to regular voice recorders. Another thing we take for granted is how sensitive this equipment is, how small it is, how compact it is, how compact it's become. We literally have these little pocket devices that are now recording everything we're saying. Is it more possible that a ghost is talking to us, or that all of this saturated radio frequency that's around us throughout our daily lives is somehow seeping in? Now, there are different modulations and there are different encryptions and all kinds of, like, I'm sure there's some computer people out there who are rolling their eyes being like, there's no way that, voice over IP on Wi-Fi is going to be, I'm getting really technical here. Anyway,
I like it. Finish your thought. There's no way that
voice over IP that's encrypted is going to be able to, seep into a digital voice recorder that's, even 20 feet away from a Wi-Fi access point. But when you talk about things like amplitude modulation, AM radio, that's not encrypted at all. Amplitude modulation is a very simple way to transmit a human voice. We have amateur radio operators all over the world who are constantly sending things over shortwave radio, bouncing off the ionosphere from all the way around the world, right? So we have people in Australia talking to people in the United States, and they're having a great time. They're doing their hobby. They're doing their thing. And is it possible that those really low frequencies or even really high frequencies, because some of them can operate on that, are either directly interacting with these digital voice controllers, with these analog voice controllers, or is it a ghost?
Yeah, so that that side of the paranormal explanation of EVP, you're not finding very likely. As likely as there's other plausible explanations.
I'm intrigued by it. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of people would point to the Edison quote where they were like, hey, he said that, we should... First of all, Edison stole most of his ideas. Kind of a shitbag when it comes to a lot of things.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with that, look it up.
Yeah, look that up. I'll put something in the show notes that points out all the things. If not, you can watch, what is it, The Prestige, I think.
I always get that one mixed up with like the magician ones.
Right. Well, he is a magician, but
right.
I think it's The Prestige. Anyway, either way, where he's hunting down Tesla, right? The poor old guy. And Nikola Tesla's life, by the way, is a really interesting story within itself as well. If you ever check that out, check out his life on Wikipedia or I'm sure there's plenty of documentaries out there about him. A lot of people would point to that and be like, hey, this guy invented this technology, right? Which he didn't. And he said that, they'd be able to record the dead, which he never did. And he might have meant something completely different because it was a completely different time, different context. Try to remember that when people say things from 100 years ago, they might not mean what you think they mean because words change over 100 years, right? And context changes. So I like the idea. I want to believe. And I think that's like my main theme was like, and I know that you and I just recently started watching the X-Files, but you know that I had that poster, the Mulder poster of like, I want to believe in my office for a really long time. Like I really do. I really want to believe. And a lot of my skepticism is mostly because like, it's like, it's not more plausible that it's a ghost than it's any of these other millions of other factors.
Yeah. So this is radio interference. Can those interferences be, another explanation could be contamination. It's real human voices. They're just not paranormal. You're just picking up on. Yeah. So what do you think then, going back to the hotel, what do you think it was?
You said this was in New York City?
New York State, upstate.
Okay. Was it, I mean, it's a hotel, so it's probably in a heavily populated area.
Yeah, we don't know. Like, that's a problem to me that we don't know how.
Hotels are rarely, the Stanley is, I guess, somewhere. It's like standing by itself, right?
Right.
But like if we're talking about upstate New York and like a heavily, like a densely populated area, I guess it's hard to say. If this is in like a densely populated area, really easy to like figure this one out, right? Probably, like you said, contamination. We're actually hearing people out on the street. Okay. We're hearing people walking by. We're hearing the people next door. The materials used, there's not a lot of attenuation of voices that happens, which means that you can hear people through walls, right?
So you could be hearing a TV with a violent scene playing out, or in the up and down volume of a movie or something.
Yeah.
From another room.
Yep.
Or a neighbor.
100%.
Okay.
That's number 2. Number 3 is the RF stuff I was talking about.
So
contamination is number 2.
More is number 2.
Yeah, I think number 1 was that it's actual ghost, right?
Oh, yeah.
Or no, number 1 was that it's.
We're talking about the mundane, we'll quote mundane explanations, as the paranormal investigator people call them, mundane explanations, where we're talking about the reasonable explanations or the scientifically explainable.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's
the paranormal versus the non-paranormal. Yeah.
That's
so you said
here,
number
right?
1 is ghosts. So that is not.
No. I think originally I said number 1 was like people's stomachs gurgling and like things like that, like somebody's shoe squeaks.
Okay.
I think the last one would be ghost. Okay. Sorry, I confused myself. That was my fault.
2 different categories. Okay, so of the non-paranormal explanations.
Of the non-paranormal explanations, yeah. So let's go with number 1 is that the investigator's stomach is gurgling, somebody burps, somebody's shoe squeaks, there's a dripping pipe.
Got it.
But then the dripping pipe kind of leaks, then, pun intended, leaks into contamination, right? So whatever the surrounding is.
Okay.
And you and I recently went to Savannah, and they were like, we recorded these EVPs of these people yelling. And this was at like midnight, and there were drunk people everywhere yelling outside of this place. So I was like, probably the drunk people outside.
Yeah, all the time for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
That's been the sounds of the city of Savannah.
That's right. Savannah is a very drunk city. What
was that? We're hearing live EVP.
What was I saying? Was it number 2 or number 3?
Number 2, you were
number
saying
2 is the contamination.
Contamination.
Number 3 is RF, and you could say RF contamination. That's fine. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like the same thing. Number 4 is ghost.
Okay. That's not on the non-paranormal list.
Well, maybe someday it'll be normal.
Okay. You don't go to hoaxes or as commonly.
Okay, and that's another good one. So I'd like to believe that most people who are doing this are doing it legitimately. Like, and don't get me wrong, like the ghost hunters and the ghost adventurers, like you got to take that with a grain of salt.
Produced television.
It's produced television. Yeah. They have to cause something to happen, otherwise they're not going to get viewers and they're not going to get another season. I don't think that they're necessarily faking it, but they might be like extra searching extra hard for that EVP where a woman is screaming or something like that.
Yeah, that's why I bring up hoaxes on this episode, and we haven't really talked about that a lot before, like with the Stanley or with any of the stories. I go right to like that's a hoax, because you want to have kind of good faith that, and there's so much of what we're talking about is the priming or expectancy or wanting to hear something is audio pareidolia,
right?
Is that or that some people call self-deception, that we don't, but these are unconscious things that happen to us,
right? So
hoaxes are explicitly faking this stuff, and I bring it up because it seems really common with EVP.
Hoaxes are really common.
It seems on the as you say on the more mass scale of this is a YouTube show or a TV show or
right.
The other samples that I found,
okay,
that were just like clip after clip of, as you say, out of context, really short. I don't know if you want to hear any of these.
I do. Let's do it.
So we could listen to a YouTube collection of the best EVP videos.
Do you want to tell me about this, or you just want me to play it?
Just play it. I really have not much to say other than just give it a listen.
Hey everybody, Dustin from the future here again. Go ahead and click on link number 2 if you don't want to be influenced by any of my reactions and want to come to your own conclusions. Thanks. Why is the Final Fantasy music playing?
I don't know.
I was like, this sounds like a video. Oh, it's Final Fantasy. I recognize this.
This person making this YouTube channel wanted to start their videos with this.
Is that London Bridge in the eye? Yeah. No. Should I not be? Okay.
Oh, I don't know.
Headphone use is recommended. Good, because we got headphones on. Okay, here we go. Somebody's stomach rumbled. No.
What are they saying that it's supposed to be?
How can they leave us like this?
Okay, so are you listening? Because that's another thing. These show you what they're supposed to be saying.
Right. And I listened the first time.
As you're listening.
It sounds like someone's stomach is rumbling, and then they find it's the audio pareidolia.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, not for sure. As we say, there are many possible explanations, but it's when you are listening to something with someone telling you, here's what you're supposed to be hearing.
So should I not be looking at what they're... Well, they play it one time, and then they tell you what they think.
And then that's right. That's why it's nicely set up, because it plays it, and then it plays it again by telling you.
Okay, let's go to number 2. The Gill House. Why do you care is what they think they're saying there. Again, sounds like someone's stomach's rumbling, or they burped.
Okay.
Number 3, the old haunted pharmacy. They may laugh at you. Hey, get out. Okay, first of all, the other thing that I noticed with a lot of EVPs, none of them make any fucking sense. Like, they'll ask them a question, and then it's not an answer, it's not anything. It's just this random bobbledy-boop, and the reason is because they're trying to find words to go with these sounds that are in the background. Yeah. That didn't sound like a human voice to me.
Okay.
But again, I'm not like an audio guy. Anyway, I guess I am kind of an audio guy. But number 4, Mansfield Reformatory. Sounded like echoing and voice modulation. Let me rest. I'm fucking tired of this, is what they think that said. Nope. Number 5, Dwight L. Barnes Building. That was somebody's footsteps. That's his suit in. This sentence. EVP number 6, Bellbrook Business. There were so many people talking, I couldn't even hear it. Apparently it said, prove it. Here's the spirit box. Quit it. Quit laughing. And yeah, that was a human voice saying quit it, quit laughing, because it's the spirit box that was pulling it from actual radio signals that were being sent out. This is number 8. Why do you ask me? That's not a... Nobody talks like that, first of all. No, that sounded like background noise. Number 9, the old haunted pharmacy. I think I heard I hate you. Think you're funny is what they think, he said. Mm-hmm. So I was off on that one. Okay, and that was the end of that one.
So that would be the latter, that you heard a voice, but not everyone will agree what it said.
Right.
That's called a class B.
Okay, that was a class B. Possibly a C. It was a class B, but I give it an F.
Okay. Would you like me to describe the class system?
Please.
The classification system, I'll just describe what it is and then I'll tell you where it comes from.
Okay.
Class A, B, and C. Class A and B. Class A can be heard and understood over a speaker by most people, just a speaker through your naked ears. Class B can be heard over a speaker, but not everyone will agree to what it has said, with what the voice says. Class C can only be heard with headphones and is difficult to understand.
I think everything I heard just now was class C, actually.
Well, I think about this as meant to be a YouTube video that could be played on any speaker, and the idea being that you could hear all the pieces, but the fact that you're listening with headphones, that's where I get confused. These classification systems it's not well defined. If it depends upon how you're listening and you're defining it based on that's confusing to me.
Right. What scientific journal was this recorded
So I want
in?
to tell you where the source of this class system is. Classification system is used by the Association Trans Communication, A-Trans-C, which was founded by Sarah Estep in 1982. It was originally founded as the American Association of Electronic Voice Phenomena, AAEP. Sounds very much like it's an association, it's got that word in it, and they are dedicated to this. Her objective was to, quote, provide objective evidence that we survive physical death in our individual conscious state. So she had a very particular, she had that earlier definition of what an EVP is, and she wanted to find evidence of that. So that's completely, to me, is starting your association with a confirmation bias. I'm going to provide objective evidence of a thing that I want to find.
Right, but I also appreciate her saying it. I'm going to define this, and this is what I think.
Yeah. And then so that's where the class system comes from. The interesting piece to me, I don't know these studies, I don't know that someone said research has shown that on average a class A or B will be heard correctly and understood only 20 to 25% of the time. So if they found research that only 20 to 25% of the time a class A or B will be correctly heard, how is it then still a class A? If a class A is defined as can be heard or understood over a speaker by most people,
right?
That's not 20 to 25%. So now your definition is not substantiated. This percentage will increase as the listener becomes accustomed to a particular practitioner's usual examples. This goes to me if there's an entire, this is a society of people who share methods. So if you go to the website, there are like steps and procedures for how you're supposed to be listening, and that we're not probably doing it right is what it sounds to me that EVPers would say. We're not listening with the right equipment or repeatedly, or with we have to be focused on collecting a bunch of examples. There's the library of examples that I was trying to find, like here are links to this library, and they share EVPs, and those links continue to be no longer working. It's really hard to find.
I wonder why.
Yeah, well, and I think that goes to an interesting piece about why the internet was invented in the first place, was so that researchers could share data. And those who actually use this scientific methods and publish in reputable journals, we value sharing our data in the right context, and making it easy to find our research. So that's just me as a researcher being annoyed by people who don't make it easy to share information. They say the percentage of class A or B examples being correctly heard will also increase if the listener takes time to use headphones and listen to the example many times. So but I don't know, again, if you're saying here's what you should be hearing, you have to listen in a certain environment and so many times.
Right.
Yeah. So I wanted to share that with you.
Okay.
So it seems like we've talked about what's going on here. Can I share with you one more example?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. Well, before I do that...
Are these all class A's? Because if not, forget it.
I know. Well, or do you want to flip the script a little bit and hear a little bit from me? How about I play this one more? I really want to hear you to hear, and then we can talk a little more. Okay,
let's do it.
Okay, so let me play this one for you.
Okay.
Tell me what you hear on my computer.
I hear Yanny.
You do?
I do hear Yanny.
Okay. Well, you need to listen many, many more times and with better headphones, because you should be hearing Laurel, which is what I hear. Mm-hmm. So what's the deal?
I can hear Laurel. Hold on. Because I can do this. Hold on. Give me a second.
Okay. This is such a throwback, right?
Go ahead.
So old school. Okay.
Go ahead and play it. I hear Laurel and Yanny now.
That's so impressive. That's impressive that you can do that. You're familiar with this. Mm-hmm. Who isn't? This is the audio version of the blue dress.
The blue dress.
Gold dress. Yeah. So thanks for listening to that. What's my point?
I want to hear that. Let's throw it back over the fence to you. Let's hear. You heard the really boring RF version of this and electronics version of this. Now let's hear the much more interesting psychological.
Well, and these are the explanations that I think it's as important to talk about radio interference and contamination. And as you said, there's that common explanation that I also see here of it's audio pareidolia, where we are perceiving random or vague stimuli as meaningful. We do this pareidolia. We do it with. We see faces in patterns. We see animals or human faces in things that are random because we are meaning-making creatures. So that's a really common explanation for this, that we do it with sound too, especially when we're primed. So there's the expectancy piece, the priming piece, the desire to find meaning in randomness, even if we're not primed, that we just as humans do that. There's a, quote, self-deception piece paranormal psychologists talk about, where people who are EVPers, who do this work a lot, want to hear something. I'll come back to that in a moment. But what this audio pareidolia doesn't get at is just at a base level when it comes to sensory perception, we are all so unique. Like what we hear and that it's a subjective experience, right? There's objective stimuli. You could argue it's objective. There's sound waves coming at us that you and I are experiencing the same thing right now. Yanni or Laurel, it's one sound, but we hear it differently because there's such a subjective experience. And it isn't just because we are meaning making. It isn't just because of our higher level human parts of our brain that want to hear something.
Right.
You didn't know what I was going to play for you. Maybe you wanted to hear a sound, a voice.
I wanted to hear a ghost.
You wanted to hear a ghost, but
oh well.
So it's even though I'm talking about subcortical level auditory processing, our brains hear different things. I think that's important to point out too.
Yeah. 100%.
So without the meaning part of it, without the desire to hear something or making it meaningful, we process things differently. And there's speech and language and auditory specialists who dedicate their entire lives to this work, to helping us understand the ear, to helping us understand the thalamus, the part of our brain that transfers stimuli to the meaning-making parts of our brain, the understanding parts, the auditory processing centers of the brain. Oh, these people are brilliant, and they do such important work. They help people hear who can't hear. They help people speak who have speech-language difficulties.
Yeah, and if you ever doubt that, you go and you watch one of those videos of like a child hearing for the first time and like the mother just bawling and the child crying from hearing their voice or their name spoken for the first time.
It's a beautiful
These
profession.
people are amazing, and we just distilled in a very crappy way everything they do in an hour.
Well, okay, so the reason I bring up those people is because I found one honors thesis and a beautiful undergraduate. I love undergrads. They're an honors thesis from the Department of Speech and Speech Science at Eastern Kentucky University. I'm sorry, it might be the Department of Special Education. The title of it was Assessment of Electronic Voice Phenomena Through Speech Science. And what I really appreciated was that they interviewed paranormal investigators and they looked at these paranormal societies and as well as the investigators themselves, and they did a systematic process to understand what's going on. And one of the main conclusions, they said, no societies report experience collaborating with a speech professional or utilizing speech analysis in order to assist in their interpretation. They're being left out of this entire thing. And I think that's really important.
Well, I got to be honest with you. I don't see too many psychologists going along with these folks either. To be like, you guys are really freaking out right now. Like, let's do some breathing exercises.
Right.
Let's calm things down.
Right.
Because otherwise you're going to start hearing and seeing things because that you're priming yourself to do so.
Yeah.
Right. And that's not the point of these shows. Again, and I don't think they're bad people. I don't think they're faking it.
No.
I think they're jazzing themselves up, or however you want to put it. I'm sure there's a psychological priming, I think, was the term that you've been using throughout these last couple of
maybe
episodes.
I'm using it wrong. I don't know. I hope not. Gosh.
But I think that's what's going
Expectancy.
on. And it's kind of another reason why we started this show. And you've kind of succinctly put it as we are somewhat of a scientific literacy review, or
I mean,
like...
we're
kind of learning a little.
We're a science literacy podcast hidden in a paranormal podcast.
Right. We're putting this stuff to an objective test where we're not necessarily saying the other people are faking it or anything.
No.
Like, these are all like, I believe that they believe that things are going on. It's just, what are the explanations for that? And, where are we at? And where can we apply that to other parts of our lives? Part of this is because one of the things that I used to love doing too is looking at conspiracy theory videos.
Yeah.
And then conspiracy theories got out of hand. And a lot of people started truly believing them to the point of where they were driving to pizza restaurants in D.C. and shooting guns at people. And then it wasn't funny anymore. It wasn't fun anymore. Right. To an extent, I truly did admire the people's brains who were doing this, because they were really using somewhat to what I could see of kind of like critical thinking of being like, well, if this is that, and this is that, and making these connections, right? But really all they were doing is just kind of getting deeper and deeper into their own psychosis, or, whatever. I'm sure there's a better term to use than that. And I kind of see that happening with paranormal stuff now too. If you have a video on YouTube and you're like, I saw a ghost, it gets 1 million views. If you have a video on YouTube and it's like, these children are starving in this country, it gets like 1,000 views.
Yeah.
There's something wrong there, right? Bringing it back.
Yeah, I was like, wow. Oh, deep stuff.
So bringing it back here to what we're doing here, I think it's really important to say that sometimes conspiracy theories are right. It's very rare, right? Like Watergate, right? Like there was this conspiracy theory that, Nixon was doing all this crazy stuff and he knew about it and blah, blah, blah. And it turned out to be true. Now everybody expects Watergate every time something happens. I feel the same way about paranormal stuff. Like, I don't want to completely discount anything from happening, but I want to make sure that when you see these videos on YouTube, when you see these shows on primetime television or on network TV, that you're applying true critical thinking and saying, wait a second, what do auditory specialists say about this kind of stuff?
Right.
What do psychologists say about this kind of stuff? What do physicists say about this kind of stuff? People who actually dedicate their lives to a specific skill set, a very specific and very detailed study, and truly know it. Not some guy or woman who is an AV specialist, is a talking head, goes out and gets themselves worked up in a situation where they're in a dark room and they're like, I heard something. Yeah, if I was in a dark room by myself, I would hear things too, and it would freak me out. But guess what? I'm not going to go around telling everybody that there's freaking ghosts all over the place, because that's irresponsible. So, sorry, we're bringing it back. I might delete this.
I don't think you should. I think what I'll try to bring that down to is, I completely agree with you, because it is not paranormal until you've ruled out the normal.
Right.
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's it.
Right, but how do you do that without having the right
normal people in? And that's and it's not about excluding, it's about including to get to the paranormal. Because we find it pretty cool. Like, I have all these normal, typical psychological explanations for things, but I still think the idea of the paranormal is pretty cool. I'm open-minded.
Yeah.
I'm a skeptic in that I start with science and the observable, and then I'm interested. That's cool. I just come back to, I just can say, that's cool. That's cool. That's a cool idea. And I hope we can keep at it with science so that we can eventually explain it. We're destroying magic, right? That was always the idea, like
replacing science with magic. Magic
with science. Yeah. And it was like, I don't know, we all want to believe in science too, or magic too. We just,
we've yet to see it.
Yeah. So, there's one other research article. And it's not just like the honors thesis, this is a unpublished psychology dissertation. So that being said, but it's from the University of Central Lancashire. And this is a person who was interviewing people who use EVP. And I'll just put it in the show notes. Maybe we'll just wrap up there. But I want to leave that so that people know there are also people studying this from what goes on with EVPers, and to get it, maybe they're hearing stuff because they want to. What I thought was a really interesting finding is in this huge dissertation where they did several studies, one of the sub-studies was an experiment where they had people who are what they called high EVPers and people who are low EVPers. So people who use it regularly versus people who use these technologies, maybe casually or less frequently. I can't remember how they defined it.
Right.
So look at that first. But in this study, what they found was there was no significant difference between low and high EVPers when distinguishing signal and noise on a signal detection task. So experience didn't seem to matter with that. However, when the task was introduced as an EVP task rather than a non-paranormal task, so they primed some of them by saying this is an EVP task. Like this is to hear EVP.
Okay.
This is you were expecting to hear a voice versus just a non-paranormal task of listening to audio stimuli. Participants showed a higher criterion value regardless of their EVP-ness. They were less likely to report hearing a voice.
Wow. Okay.
They
I like
because
that.
they were
Yeah.
like, oh, I need to take this seriously.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is the implication here. I need to take this seriously. I need to really see, did I hear a voice or not hear it? Like, because if I did, then it's a EVP. They don't have an explanation for this. Versus the group that was told you're just listening to see if you hear a voice of a person in this.
Right.
They were like, yeah, I heard a voice. So I want to give EVPers credit in that way. And I think that's what they were saying is that like they actually care about what they're doing, that they just probably aren't aware of all the mundane explanations that they should be.
Right. I think most paranormal investigators care about what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
It does make me wonder, though, how many of them still truly believe after doing so many investigations, because some of these people have been in like hundreds of investigations. Yeah. And have they really ever truly found anything? Because you watch some of these things and it's like over and over again. It's kind of like the same thing. Like maybe a pillow moved and maybe they caught an EVP. And that's the most evidence they've gotten for some of the most quote unquote haunted places in the world. So I do wonder about that. I wonder if you could ever get like a true interview with somebody and say like, hey, how do you really feel about this? You know, I don't think you ever will get an honest answer because they're making too much money doing it. Shit. If the Travel Channel wanted to pay me hundreds of thousands of dollars and also send me around the world to amazing places to stay there for a night and, you know, free room and board and everything. Shit, man, I'm on board. Hey, Travel Channel, call me up.
So there's a lack of humility.
That's not fair.
Well, okay, then I would say
we live in a capitalist society in which, you know, we are like, if we get a good gig and we can do it for a couple of years and make enough money to do whatever we want, then I don't know.
They're keeping themselves employed for sure. But that's again, that it just is so non-scientific to me because we're constantly in science faced with imposter syndrome because we're always like, am I doing this right? Am I doing it good enough? What did I miss or how am I? And, you know.
Right. Is science itself something that is compatible with capitalism? There. Yeah. See, that's a whole nother episode.
Really, it's not even.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. If you want us to investigate a specific story, send something to stories@paranormaloutsiders.com.
We'd love to hear from you.
Love to hear from you. We are also on Twitter at paranormalopod. We're on Twitter. I'll put the Twitter. I'll put the tweeters down in the show notes. Also, we are starting a TikTok as well, so we'll be on there.
Gosh.
We're starting a TikTok.
We're gonna get on there, and we're gonna.
I don't know if starting a TikTok is the right way to say that. I'm pretty sure.
So out.
Do you remember the TikTok from that first EVP we listened to? Well, we're starting a TikTok because of that. Because the ghost told us to. And that's why we're the Paranormal Outsiders. So until next time.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah.